Alright, welcome back to my video series, Solving the Mystery of Dualism. This is the third video in the series. Once again, the material that I cover here is also found covered in greater detail in my book, Evolving Towards the Truth. And you can find links to my book at my website, jeffkosmosky.com. You can find links to my website on my YouTube page, and you can find the book at amazon.com. As you might remember, at the end of the last video, we basically hit this first epistemological hurdle. The essence of this hurdle is that as we look at these diagrams of the cell wall of a neuron, we're somewhat perplexed that all that appears to be going on is the movement of inanimate matter. What I mean is that we see these charged particles, these ions of potassium and sodium, moving back and forth across the cell wall, and in our mind's eye it just appears kind of ludicrous that that's all that's happening, and yet on the other side of the equation I'm experiencing these entirely non-physical experiences, this mental phenomena of qualia, such as the smell of peppermint leaves or the taste of strawberry. It just seems entirely absurd that somehow this activity of physical matter on one side can be producing something as entirely non-physical on the other side. The problem with this interpretation, with this mental vision of what's happening at this level of activity, is that it's basically incorrect. It's basically wrong. What I mean is that what's happening at the neurological level down at the cell wall is not actually the movement of hard little inanimate bits of physical matter. The more correct and sophisticated way of envisioning this is to see it as an activity in the electromagnetic realm. What do I mean by that? Well, for one thing, we now realize and better understand the nature of the atom. We know that it's surrounded by electrons, but these electrons shouldn't be construed to be hard little bits of matter. A better way to envision them is to, in our mind's eye, is to see them as being dynamic clouds of electrical volume, meaning that these electrons are kind of spread out over space, and they don't really lend themselves to a physical explanation. It's better to think of them as being kind of a dynamic, fluctuating cloud of electrical activity. So these atoms are surrounded by a number of these electrons, and these electrons in essence create this this envelopment, this dynamic cloud around them. So when we see ions and atoms moving back and forth across these cell walls, yes, it makes sense to envision them as being hard little physical objects, because in our mind's eye that's what we can relate to. We're more familiar with that model. However, realistically, we should view them as being these clouds of charged electrical activity moving around. We also know that whenever there's a movement of electrical charge, there's a accompanying development or creation of a magnetic field. In other words, these two activities, the movement of electrons and the creation and movement of magnetic fields, are closely intertwined. Also, whenever there's a change in a magnetic field, it induces movement to nearby electrons. So this is basically the environment in which these ions and atoms are occupying. Whenever there's a movement of one of these charged ions, we should expect some change or a creation of a magnetic field. And whenever there's a change of a magnetic field, we should assume that it's going to impose some tendency to move any other nearby electrons which happen to be enveloping any other nearby atoms or ions. So to summarize, when we look at these diagrams of what's happening at the walls of the axons, we shouldn't be viewing this as the movement of hard little particles of inanimate matter, but something far more complex and something that we have a very difficult time really understanding. And this presents a good news, bad news opportunity for us as we try to bridge this chasm of dualism. First, the good news. The good news is that basically, as you'll recall, the question we are trying to answer is, how does neurological or how does neurophysical activity produce qualia? In essence, we are asking this question: how do the activities of moving, tangible, and visible physical objects in our firing neurons produce our intangible, invisible, and immaterial qualia? But now with this more sophisticated view of what's actually happening at this neurophysical level, that is with this understanding that it's more of an electromagnetic phenomenon, the question has changed somewhat. Now we're asking, how does the activity of immaterial, invisible, and intangible electrical and magnetic fields produce our intangible, invisible, and immaterial qualia? So in essence, the chasm of dualism is suddenly much narrower. The dichotomy doesn't seem to be quite as severe. This is the good news. The bad news is that we really can't understand what's happening down at this electromagnetic level. Yes, on one hand we can say that we appreciate that they're not these physical bits of matter and that they're more of a dynamic cloud-like phenomenon, but that's about as far as we can really go. We have no basis for understanding why it would be that the movement of electrons causes some magnetic fields, nor do we even know what a magnetic field actually is. And further, we can't really say why it would be that the changing of a magnetic field would cause the movement of electrons. That is, we really can't empathize at all with what's happening at this electromagnetic level. Yes, we would prefer that the activities would involve hard little bits of inanimate matter, because from an evolutionary perspective and from an epistemological perspective, this is the realm in which we're much more comfortable. We prefer physical explanations because we can empathize with things like billiard balls and bowling balls and BBs. So this may indeed be very bad news. It may appear as if we may never cross the chasm of dualism. It may appear as if we'll never create our explanatory bridge. However, is this true? Well, not really. As you might recall in the introductory video, I mentioned that there were two epistemological hurdles. We've now hit the first one and basically turned that into a support column for our explanatory bridge, meaning that we now realize that the phenomenon occurring in the neurological realm is actually closer in kind to what's happening at the metaphysical or mental level. In the next video, we're going to change our sights and attempt to encounter the second epistemological hurdle, and that'll hopefully lead us to the completion of our explanatory bridge across the chasm of dualism. I'm Jeff Kosmowski. Thanks for watching.